Michelle Barron, Deputy Editor at Afar. Welcome to View from Afar, a podcast that spotlights the people and ideas shaping the future of travel. And in this special series, I'm coming to you live from the floor of IPW, the annual travel conference organized by the U.S. Travel Association to share the best of America with the rest of the world. In this episode, we're talking with Elliott Ferguson, President and CEO of Destination DC. Elliott's been with the destination marketing organization that represents the nation's capital since 2001 and was named CEO in 2009. It's been quite a year for Elliott. DC broke tourism records in 2024, welcoming 27.2 million visitors and generating $2.3 billion in tax revenue for the district. And in December, Elliott was named chair of Brand USA's board of directors, the organization that markets America to international travelers. But just 4 months into his one-year term as Brand USA chair, Elliott was abruptly fired by the White House in April. The move left the travel industry asking questions about the future of America's destination marketing efforts. And it happened right as Elliott and other tourism leaders are expressing concerns about the climate for international visitors in 2025. Throughout his career, Elliott has been a champion for diversity, equity, and inclusion in the travel industry, and as someone who has worked in Washington through the pandemic, civil unrest, and multiple election cycles, Elliott brings a unique perspective on resilience and leadership during turbulent times. All right, let's do this. Welcome, Elliott. So, looking ahead to America 250 in 2026 and the NFL draft in 2027, how are you positioning the city to capitalize on these big events?
Yeah, absolutely. One, it's a pleasure to be here. And for us, as we look at all the reasons why people travel, specifically to Washington, D.C., monuments, memorials, and museums, we appreciate unique events like this that really accentuate or add to the trip themselves.
Right.
So America's 250 for us is a big deal, clearly. There are other cities in the U.S. that were the nation's capital before Washington, D.C., but we know will be the center of attention. It's going to be a year-long event that showcases all things tied to, the celebration of the 250 years of independence. And the juxtaposition to that, of course, would be the NFL draft, which will bring a different crowd.
Right.
But a large crowd to
Yep.
Washington, D.C., notably over 1 million people. I think the key thing for us is economic development associated with visitation. And as we're looking at these crowds coming to the city, for whatever those reasons are, how do we also position DC for them to look at us a little differently and above and beyond the federal experience that we normally enjoy?
Right. I love the idea of sort of spreading the wealth, so to speak, like having
Absolutely.
people come and spend their tourism dollars, in smaller businesses and literally spreading it further into the city.
Absolutely. We just did that with World Pride.
Mm-hmm.
We knew that you'd have a large number of people coming to the District of Columbia that may have been before or may have never been, but they're coming for World Pride, and hopefully
Right.
they'll leave thinking differently about
Yeah.
Washington, how green, how accessible,
Mm-hmm.
all the things in which we enjoy about our destination.
Right. Well, I'm glad you brought up World Pride because
All right.
it is a particularly interesting time to
Yes.
be discussing Washington, D.C. and tourism in the nation's capital at a time when our country's politics and policies are being scrutinized internationally. So what are the unique challenges you face in your role and Washington, D.C. faces in general as a tourism destination?
The key thing is separating the two.
Right.
The Washington, D.C., the 535 members of Congress that come and stay in D.C. to make laws versus the 700,000+ of us that are our residents. Today, we showcased a video that really talked about how Washington, the residents of Washington, embrace diversity, how we embrace people from all types of backgrounds, and equally as much a city with over 175 embassies, people choosing to remain in Washington after their time in that embassy is up, how we're culturally diverse in so many different ways. So our goal is to yes, celebrate the fact that we are the city we are because of the federal experience, but separate ourselves from that in terms of the experience that people will have, especially anything that is negative in terms of rhetoric from lawmakers.
And you make such a good point because there's Washington, the seat of government, and then there's DC, the place where people actually live. So how do you distinguish the two and market the district beyond the museum and politics? I mean, you gave some examples, but how do you continue to get that message out there?
The key thing, our current campaign, there's there's only one DC, but it also ties to the international feel of the city. It ties into the restaurant scene. It ties to all the things that really make us a unique destination, but it really ties to the people themselves. I think sometimes we get lost in translation in terms of coming to Washington because everyone thinks we wear suits and we're all talking politics. Part of the reason why I did not wear one today on stage, but it gives us a chance to really showcase how the global community sees Washington. So how do we capture those experiences, share them with potential visitors that are coming to the U.S. and to Washington, D.C. to really talk about a different side of our city?
Right, absolutely. When we talk about sort of the people who live there, how do you serve both the locals and tourists when the needs of each are so different?
I mean, I think that they're different, but they're somewhat unique because I think that visitors like coming for the traditional reasons, but they also like unique events that are taking place in Washington, like festivals and, jazz festival, to name a few, plus some of those that are coming in the future, including World Pride. We're hosting Club Cup this week, which is a precursor to World Cup. Visitors,
it's a test run, right?
It is a test run, and it's something that Washingtonians enjoy in terms of being able to take advantage of these events, as well as visitors. So I think it's a combination of those things.
I'm so glad you brought that up because we keep talking about all these big international events or, sporting events and how great it will be for international visitors, but we forget how exciting it is for domestic, for the locals.
Absolutely. I mean, even with concerts and unique things that are taking place in the city, sometimes, and I joke that folks that live in a city make the worst tourists because they never do anything until they have visitors come in town.
It's too true.
So true. But the thing that I love the most about some of the events that take place in the city is that they're embraced by the locals. We are one of the few cities that celebrate, Emancipation Day, as we have our own Emancipation Day in Washington, D.C. There are opportunities to learn more about the Washington experience, but equally as much to just enjoy the city above and beyond the federal experience, which is what's important to us. Get people into our neighborhoods, get them to see the architecture of Washington that's tied to, of course, French architecture, because the city was laid out by the French 1700 years ago, and to understand a lot more about the city above and beyond things in which they think they know about Washington.
Right. I know. I was going to say we probably all could use, a history lesson in the place that we live or we're from because we don't spend enough time, digging into all these things.
Yeah. And I will say that sometimes when you use the word history in museums, they don't resonate as fun and sexy. I always joke that family of five in Wisconsin, hey, do you want to go to Washington, D.C.? Do you want to go to Disney World? Chances are they're not going to choose Washington unless they've been before. I mean, well, you have to know your strengths and weaknesses.
Right, fair.
But what happens is that when they do come, they are wowed by, the museum experience. Yes, we appreciate the galleries with the great frescoes and sculptures, but these are immersive, interactive experiences. Yeah. And they're all free.
Yeah.
The 16 Smithsonians are free.
Point.
The zoo, which is a part of the Smithsonian, which also now has pandas again, is free. So when you really think about the value of coming to a city like Washington, the family, mom and dad appreciate the value, but the kids are probably more intrigued and impressed with what we have to offer than they probably anticipate.
Getting back to Pride Month and hosting World Pride, of course, politics always comes up when we talk about DC and all the politics around DEI. Several big sponsors did pull out. So how did you and the festival handle that? And what was it like this year? Would you say it was a successful event?
Yeah, I mean, one, it was disappointed that sponsors pulled out, and I think that there will probably be some fallout for them long term. I think that as you really look at Washington as a destination, again, 14% of Washingtonians identify as a part of the LGBTQ plus community. That is the fabric of who we are. We embrace diversity. Were the numbers what we anticipated? Absolutely not. Was it because of the rhetoric and the concerns and, the trans community, the non-binary community? Absolutely. Did we have work to do in that space? We absolutely did. I will say that overall, those that did come had a very smooth experience getting into the country, had a great experience in Washington, D.C. When I was asked earlier about, people and their concerns about travel, I mean, you got to do what you feel comfortable with doing. I think our goal is to talk about how the global community, the LGBTQ community that's represented in Washington feel about being Washingtonians. And hopefully that resonates long term. So overall, it was a good experience. It was a celebration that was well received locally. And again, it separated Washington, D.C. from D.C., the city.
And how do you see the current political climate affecting DEI efforts within the travel industry? And why does this work remain important?
Well, I think that those that are their funding that are tied to federal dollars have to be mindful as to how their DEI efforts might impact their dollars. Once upon a time, I was chair of Brand USA. And
we'll talk about that.
I figured it was coming up,
least.
so I might as well just bring it up. But we talked about me being in that space, the initial chair of Tourism Diversity Matters, and why this is important to me. As a destination, we have not taken our foot off of DEI, nor have we run from the word, so the acronym DEI. But certain organizations need to think about how that could impact their livelihood. I mean, you want to live to see another day, and I think that's important as organizations are finding their way and navigating through this unique space that we're in.
Right. And so you brought up Brand USA.
You
were chair
I
of the board for Brand USA, but half the board, all of those who were appointed by the federal government, yourself included, were removed by the new administration.
Just the officers.
So what are the implications of the change, and where do you think Brand USA goes from here?
Yeah, one thing that I will reemphasize, every president coming into office has the opportunity to do something similar to what this administration has done. It's just not been done before. I'll also say that we were not the only organization, from the board of Kennedy Center to Institute of Peace, to the head librarian of the Library of Congress. The list goes on and on.
Right.
It's been unfortunate. I was disappointed simply because we were building up so much momentum with Fred in his new role as the CEO. Fred and I have a really good relationship. We truly understand DEI for different reasons.
Yeah.
And we also understand the need to diversify how the U.S. goes after the global community.
Right.
So am I disappointed? Absolutely. I think that there was a reoccurring sense with this administration that they wanted to bring in people with the ideologies of this administration, and it is what it is. I think that between Fred and myself, we're friends.
Yeah.
Two, we represent different layers of diversity, and we really had some strong goals and initiatives associated with the direction that the organization will be going. It won't change because I'm not there. I know Fred will remain consistent in that space. And as a member of this industry, I will still remain very emphatically adamant that Brand USA gets the proper funding so that they can do the things that they were created to do 13 years ago by U.S. Travel Association.
So obviously you've navigated some challenging times. What have you learned sort of about crisis leadership that other DMOs could apply to their own situations?
Yeah, I mean, I moved to D.C. right after 9/11, and, we've had sniper and anthrax and a whole bunch of other stuff, January 6th. I think that you have to have a crisis plan.
Yeah.
And I think the plan has to change based on the scenarios at hand. By the way, we were talking about weather-related issues, and then all of a sudden we had an earthquake in Washington, D.C. over a decade ago that we weren't talking about. And I grew up in California. So I think that the goal is to make sure that you're consistently talking about a plan, external plan and an internal plan in terms of crisis, and that plan is also tied into what your city is doing, and in a city like Washington, what the federal government's plan is as well. So a lot of layers,
a lot to juggle.
Lots to juggle, but you definitely have to be mindful that those that are not prepared or don't have a plan and a cool head to deal with a crisis are probably going to fall on some difficult times.
Well, sounds like you're well suited to do the job. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of View from Afar. In the show notes, you'll find links to everything we discussed today, as well as Destination DC's website and social media handles and our recent DC coverage. And be sure to follow along this week to hear more interviews with industry experts. You can find more Views from Afar on afar.com, and be sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok. We're at Afar Media. If you enjoyed today's conversation, I hope you'll come back for more great interviews. Subscribing always makes that easy. And be sure to rate and review the show on your favorite podcast platforms. This has been View from Afar, a production of Afar Media. The podcast is produced by Aislinn Green and Nikki Golteland, with assistance from Michelle Barron and Billy Cohen. Music composition from Epidemic Sound. This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows like Culture Kids and the Explorers podcast.